Hey guys, Cryptquisher here, welcome back to the channel. It's a very special day today for all of the Skylanders community, because 9 years ago, on this exact day today, Spyro's Adventure was released. That is just incredible. Oh. Well, just because I'm several weeks late, doesn't mean that I can't celebrate the 9th anniversary anyway. So today, I have my longest, most ambitious video yet. I'm going to be ranking every single Skylanders boss fight from the main 6 Skylander games. First of all, there are some fights in these games which some people would consider to be boss fights, and some people would consider to not be boss fights. This will be happening throughout the video, as I won't be including some fights I know you guys might consider boss fights. Some of these include the Giants Arena fights, which is Brock, Pipsqueak and Jawbreaker, and then also I won't be including every single Trap Team villain, only the ones that have an important role in the game, so mainly just the Doom Raiders. And also some other small boss fights that are scattered around the game that I don't really consider to be boss fights because they're not important enough. But with all that said, let's get right into the video. There's something I'm missing. Alright, yeah, that. My absolute least favourite Skylanders boss is the Ice Wall. Now overall, the Empire of Ice is one of my favourite levels of all time. I think it has awesome music and really cool visuals, but the way they end off this level, I really dislike. So as you guessed, at the end of the level, you have to fight a wall. So this boss has actually become quite infamous for how boring and just lame it is overall. You hop onto this catapult where you shoot at the wall and it shoots back, and then you destroy the wall, and yeah. It's not challenging in any way, and it's definitely not fun either. Next up is the Mega Tank in Battlefield from Spyro's Adventure. Most of the boss fights in this game are just fighting chaos, and I find them really repetitive and kind of boring. But there are 2 quite unique bosses in the game, but sadly this is one of them. So do you actually have to fight the tank? No, not at all. You actually just stand at the side and chuck bombs at it until it explodes. I know, that's some pretty cool gameplay right there. Imagineers, why you created the guacamole monster, I'm just not quite sure. At the very end of the Sky Fortress level, you have to jump into the ship and take control of it to defeat, a guacamole monster. Look, I don't have too much of a problem with a game being unique, quirky, and just sometimes goofy overall, but this is just taking that to a whole new level, and a level that I'm just not comfortable with. The worst part is, this is actually quite fun for the first minute or 2, but it starts to drag on a bit. So yeah, the guacamole monster is definitely a mistake on Imagineer's behalf. Up next is the easiest Skylander boss in history, to the point where I don't even think it counts as a boss fight at all. Now this isn't really the Gulper's fault, as it is just supposed to be a fun little challenge for the very first level of the game. But my problem is you don't actually have to fight him, it's just a couple of platforming sequences, and then you make him drink some bad soda, and then boom, you've defeated him. But since I'm including other Doom Raiders, I feel like Gulper should get a spot on this list, even if it's not a very good spot. Now we have the first Chaos fight from Swap Force. That's right, there's more than one Chaos fight in this game. You've probably just forgot about this one. It takes place in a turret section at the end of Phantasm Forest. You have to put out all the fires, and then you're suddenly confronted by Chaos in his Doom Jet. It's not a very difficult fight though. You just have to destroy his missiles before they hit you, and put out the flames on the back of his jet. Repeat this process for about 5 minutes and you'll probably have won with no struggle. Not a bad fight, but so forgettable, and it definitely doesn't represent anything that the game has to offer. Next up is Captain Cluck from Superchargers. Whilst I love Captain Cluck's level in Superchargers, the boss fight at the end is absolutely nothing to write home about. You don't even really fight him, you just chuck these round ass chickens into these machines to shoot back at him, and that's the entire fight. At least his first fight in Swap Force was good. That'll be a lot further down on the list. And here's another god-awful boss fight from Superchargers, that being Lord Stratosphere. First off, before we even talk about the fight, this guy is so annoying. It's clear that this was done deliberately to make you dislike him, but I just really hate having to hear his stupid voice. They took the whole being obnoxious thing way too far. Anyway, on to the boss fight. You are in a vehicle, and I think that's all I have to say. And look at that, yet another horrible boss fight from Superchargers. Count Moneybone's fight is just a harder and more annoying version of Lord Stratosphere's. But I like Count Moneybone a lot more as a character because he's not as annoying as Stratosphere and he has more of a role in the story. Well, now it's time to talk about the Doomlanders. Probably one of the worst parts of Imaginators as a whole. To match the whole create your own Skylanders theme, Chaos has made some of his very own Imaginators called the Doomlanders. I suppose it's cool that you can actually make these characters to play as if you have the correct parts, but on the other hand, you can look at this as a very cheap and lazy way to have a boss fight at the end of every level. Sure, they all look different and have a different battle class, which means they have a different weapon and have different abilities, but honestly, they all feel the same in the fact that they're just not fun to fight. So that's why I've pretty much grouped them all together, but I will say that my least favourite of these fights is definitely the quick shot. That's a very tricky fight, and not in a fun way. You know what, I'm just happy that I've gotten this over and done with. I freaking hate these guys. Now we have the first Doom Raider that you actually fight, that being the Dreamcatcher. I've made it vividly clear over the past that I do not like Dreamcatcher, definitely my least favourite Doom Raider. And since she also has a pretty rubbish boss fight, that adds up to being quite high on my list. Look, she's not awful, I don't absolutely hate her, but compared to the other Doom Raider fights, of which I like a lot, Dreamcatcher just feels like the odd one out. Of course, along with the Gulper. Now on to the Rekosaurus. I often forget that this boss fight exists, but sadly it does. Whilst this is one of the better vehicle fights, it's really nothing special, and just because it's better than the other ones, doesn't necessarily mean that it's good. There's a few things I like about this fight, but overall, it's pretty boring and lackluster. Speaking of lackluster, now on to Thundertoe. If that name doesn't ring a bell, I wouldn't be surprised, because this is another pretty forgettable boss fight from Superchargers. But you actually have to fight this guy at the end of Monstrous Isles. The whole gimmick of this level is really cool. You become massive and you get to just destroy towns and cities. It's a really cool concept. So surely a boss fight mixed with this cool idea would be a very awesome time, right? Well, sadly that's not how it worked out. Not only does this fight not feel special in any way, shape or form, but it's actually just not really that good. It's incredibly easy for one of the later levels in the game for a start, and also his moveset is just predictable and boring. There's nothing much else to say, honestly. At number 34, we have the first final boss fight to be on this list, and that is of course the final Chaos fight from Imaginators. For me, this is just a disgusting reminder of how the Chaos fights used to be challenging and fun. It's clear that by this point, they've pretty much run out of things for Chaos to turn into because now he's went Super Saiyan mode. He has literally zero unique attacks. He just uses moves from Chaos's previous fights and just spams Doomlanders that can be defeated really quickly. This boss isn't difficult in the slightest, and honestly it's a complete embarrassment for anyone that's playing it. And with that, I reckon I've gotten rid of pretty much all of the bad fights. The rest of them are either just in the middle or are good. So let's keep on going, and thank you for watching this far on. Well, now if we're talking about fights that are in the middle, Sadly, the 4 Chaos fights from Spyro's Adventure are definitely going to be here. Some people will agree with me when I say this, and some people definitely won't, but I find these 4 fights to be very repetitive and far too similar. These fights take place at the end of 4 different levels: Leviathan Lagoon, Falling Forest, Creepy Citadel, and Lava Lakes Railway. One of my main gripes with these is that they take way too long to beat. From the fact that Chaos's spells drag on for far too long, and that he talks for about 10 minutes before you even start fighting, are just 2 examples. But they're not bad by any means. I quite enjoy the fact that you have to take on Chaos's evil minions that are basically just scarier versions of the normal Skylanders. At number 29, we have Evilized Whiskers. Before making this video, I was actually considering not including Evilized Whiskers because it feels more like a mini fight for me, because there's actually a boss at the end of the level that Whiskers is in. So this fight is just very okay. Whiskers is not very difficult, pretty slow, and has a very predictable moveset. Even when you rematch him in his so-called harder form later on in the level, it's still far too easy. But I mean, we've definitely seen worse, so whatever. Bubba Greebs is on the same boat as Evilized Whiskers. She kinda feels more like a mini fight, since you actually fight her during another boss fight. But if I'm including Whiskers, I may as well include her. The Queen of Greebles likes to do belly flops on the ground, which create shockwaves that you have to jump over. She also throws things like Greebles at you, but she also occasionally throws a block of dynamite that you can chuck back at her, and that's basically how you beat her. A little bit more interesting and a little bit trickier than Whiskers, but nothing too different. Next up is one of the only supercharger bosses that you don't fight in a vehicle, that being Spell Slamzer. First of all, I think Spell Slamzer is one of the stupidest names of all time. Spell Slamzer, with a Z. But I kind of like the idea behind this guy. Without knowing it for a fact, you can tell that he's almost like the leader of the Spellpunks, maybe the king of the Spellpunks even. This is obvious because 1, he kinda looks like a Spellpunk, and 2, he won't stop using them when you're fighting him. It gets really frustrating, trust me. I quite like how halfway through the fight, he teleports you to this sort of distorted dimension. It looks really strange, and kind of makes the fight more interesting. I'll be honest, one of the more unique boss fights in the series, I'll give him that. This might cause a little bit of controversy, but up next we have the Darkness. As a whole, I quite like this character. Sure, the boss fight itself isn't really that fun, quite boring, and very repetitive. But when it comes to how the Darkness ties in with the story, I think he is 10 out of 10, perfectly designed. The Darkness ends up manipulating Chaos, to the point where he even fires Glumshanks. But as the game progresses, Chaos slowly starts to become less evil, to the point where Chaos actually ends up double crossing the Darkness. But the introduction to the Darkness fight is definitely my favourite part of him. You defeat Chaos, and then Chaos teams up with you to destroy the Darkness once and for all, and whilst you're flying away, thinking that everything is ended off happily, the credits start to roll, and the Darkness tears a hole in reality and comes out to end this once and for all. This is somehow really funny, and really scary and intense at the exact same time. Trust me, if you've heard the music that plays during the credits, then you'll know why this is funny. But overall, they could have done a lot worse with the Darkness, and sure, the fight isn't good, but that's not the only thing that makes up this character. Now on to the Sheep Mage. As a character, this guy is absolutely hilarious, clearly being related to the Chompy Mage in some sort of way. He is truly the perfect boss for the Sheepwreck Islands, which is the expansion pack where you fight him. The fight itself is quite flawed though. For the most part, you're just going to be fighting enemies the entire time until he's vulnerable, and then you can attack him. Just like most things in Swap Force, this drags on a bit, which makes it even worse. As a character, I love this guy, but when it comes to the fight itself, not so much. Now on to Chaos's mum. Just like a lot of the other bosses that I've talked about, Chaos's mum is an awesome character that does make Swap Force a more unique game. But sadly, when you confront her in the final level of Swap Force, it's pretty anticlimactic. A Supreme Dark Portal Master stronger than Chaos that just sends out enemies to fight you just doesn't seem right. But that is what the fight is. She just keeps on sending out multiple waves of those evilized enemies and then occasionally shoots some lasers at you, which you have to reflect back at her. There are a few highlights of this fight though, especially when she vanishes and you have to take your Skylander off the portal to see that she's hiding in that strange realm place. It was so cool to see a non-Skylander appearing in that kind of place. But apart from that, there really isn't anything going for this fight. At number 23, I have the Angry Mutant Tree. Whilst this boss is quite obscure, I did enjoy fighting it at the end of the Enchanted Elven Forest in Imaginators. That's right, not all of the boss fights in Imaginators are bad. Who could believe it? This fight consists of two separate parts. The first is putting out all of the fires on his flaming tree tentacles, and then the second part is actually fighting him and dodging his attacks. He's quite a simple boss and he's not that difficult, but I do quite enjoy him. Next up we have Dr. Crankcase. Whilst I do like Dr. Crankcase, he's definitely one of the lesser Doom Raiders for me. Not because he's bad, I just prefer the other characters design wise and personality wise. And what can I say, Dr. Crankcase's fight is good. I did enjoy it. I like how this boss requires your absolute 100% full concentration. Because not only do you have to watch out for Dr. Crankcase's attacks, but you also have to destroy his barrels before they drop into the vats of acid and become really angry enemies. There's a lot going on here, it's pretty intense, and it's pretty fun. I like it. Now we have Chompy Mage from Skylanders Giants. It's safe to say that Welkin Village is a very cool, very original, and very memorable Skylanders level. One of the main reasons for that is because you first encounter the infamous Chompy Mage in this level. That's right, the Chompy Mage we all know and love is encountered for the first time at the end of this level. The main gimmick of this level is changing reality, and that's something that you have to do during the fight. He'll be shooting out tons of spells at you, some of them can heal you and some of them will damage you. Luckily, if you change dimension, the ones that attack you will actually heal you, and vice versa. Sadly, the healing ability makes this fight a little bit too easy for me. And that's a shame because there are points where you do have to think fast and stuff like that. But what's the point in getting hit if you can just immediately heal back up again? But still a good fight, and of course he's very funny and bursting with personality. Now on to Evil Glumshanks. I love how Chaos realizes that Glumshanks isn't actually a villain, so decides to evilize him to make him an actual threat. Evil Glumshanks, just like normal Glumshanks, is funny and such an interesting character. The fight is quite simple, but it's not bad by any means. Glumshanks hops into some sort of Archean vehicle, which fits the level quite nicely, and you have to make him drive into the spikes so that he's vulnerable for attack. And that's pretty much all there is to it. It's simple but sweet. Coming up next is Nightshade. I really don't have that much to say about Nightshade because sadly I don't have the Midnight Museum, which means that I haven't actually fought him before. But he seems pretty cool and has quite a unique boss fight. I especially love the part where he suddenly splits up into multiple different clones and you have to figure out which one is the real one. Granted, it's not difficult and neither is the rest of the boss fight, but it gives him more character and makes him more unique compared to the other villains. Up next we have Super Evil Chaos, which is the final Chaos fight for Skylanders Swap Force. I found out recently that nobody likes this boss fight, which kind of came as a shock because I think it's pretty decent. Since Chaos is really big in this fight, you have to attack different body parts. First it's the toes, and then you go into his mouth and attack his teeth, and then you actually go inside his brain where we fight some interesting enemies. And then there's finally one incredibly intense section where you have to run from Chaos, who's shooting some crazy lasers at you. I will be honest, I wish the fight was a little bit more focused on chaos, because a lot of it is just fighting enemies. And next up we have another chaos fight, that being Emperor Chaos from Skylanders Superchargers. The main reason I like this fight so much is because not only is it really fun, but it's one of the only platforming bosses in Superchargers. It's fast paced, pretty intense, and you have to make a lot of tight jumps. All of Chaos's attacks in this fight are brand new, which makes them unpredictable and fresh. There's not an incredible amount to say, but I am very impressed with this fight. Now it's time for Chef Pepperjack. No matter how unique and interesting Chef Pepperjack is as a character, I can't shake off the feeling that his fight is a lot easier than the rest of the ones in the game. I ended up losing a lot more characters to the other boss fights, yes, including Chompy Mage, which was actually earlier on in the game than Chef Pepperjack. Don't get me wrong, it's still difficult, but I feel like it should be slightly trickier. Of course, I still absolutely love Chef Pepperjack though, he's such an awesome character. At number 15, I have the evil sea monster from Skylanders Imaginators. I'm not sure what my obsession with this boss is. I think I just like it a lot because it's one of the only unique and good bosses in Imaginators. It's just such a breath of fresh air to see a non-Doomlander boss in this game. Some of you watching might not think that the evil sea monster deserves a spot this low in the video, but I want to give it some credit for not being a Doomlander, honestly. At number 14 is the Rubble Maker from the Lost Imaginite Mines in Skylanders Imaginators. This boss is not interesting because of the fight whatsoever. In fact, whilst the fight's not bad, it's pretty simple and easy. What's interesting about the Rubble Maker is that if there's never a new Skylanders game, he will be the last ever boss, making him the true final boss, I guess. As cool as the Rubble Maker is, I really hope this isn't the case. I also love how after taking a chunk of his health away, he just regains it all back up, only for Blobbers, the almighty god, to come and punch him right in the face, which completely destroys him. Blobbers, I know you're hiding it, just show us your true power already. At number 13 is Cluck from Swap Force. Don't worry, I am definitely finished talking about the one from Superchargers. The main gimmick of the Tower of Time level is the ability to stop time. This is used very effectively throughout the level, and since you fight Cluck at the very end, it only makes sense to include the time mechanic in some sort of way. All of Cluck's attacks are lightning fast, to the point where you're definitely going to have to stop time to be able to catch up with him and damage him. So whilst you might be thinking to yourself, well that's easy, just keep on slowing down time so you can keep on attacking him. Well, to make it more interesting, sometimes Cluck throws in some time spell punks, which are seen throughout the level. Whenever you stop the time, these annoying guys will immediately unfreeze it, making the fight a lot less trivial. So now you have to focus on these spell punks and focus on Cluck's attacks at the same time. I will admit, on paper this seems like quite a simple boss fight, but I do have a lot of bias towards Cluck because the Tower of Time is one of my favourite levels. At number 12 we have another Swap Force boss, Baron Von Shellshock. As most of you know, I am in love with Motleyville, which is the level where we meet Baron Von Shellshock. I love how we interact with him through the level, it creates more build up for the actual fight. And when the fight comes, well, it's not a bad fight at all. It's not the highlight of Baron Von Shellshock, but it is still quite fun. He's a very funny and unique character with so much personality. And he is one of the reasons why I liked Motleyville so much. Number 11 is an absolute classic, the Stone Golem from Spyro's Adventure. Whilst not a difficult boss fight in any way, shape or form, the Stone Golem is one of the most memorable boss fights in the entire series in my opinion. It's a simple fight but really effective. This boss mainly relies on platforming and manoeuvring, even with the very limited move options that you have in SSA. Thank goodness there was at least one good boss that isn't Chaos. Just managing to get into the top 10 is Luminous. The Sunscraper Spire was the perfect introduction to the light element. And Luminous is such a great character, and we'll get onto why in a second. The fight itself is quite unique, and if you're not paying attention, it will catch you off guard and possibly even kill you. But that's not the main highlight for Luminous. Oh no, not even close. The absolute best part of this fight is the plot twist. You head to the Sunscraper Spire with Mags, but throughout the level she starts to act more and more suspicious, which is kind of strange. But then you realise that she's been acting so odd because Luminous had actually shapeshifted into her and fooled you into powering up the Sunscraper Spire, which makes him super powerful. Now when I say it in my boring monotone voice, it doesn't sound that exciting. But trust me, I was jumping up and down screaming when I found out that this was a thing. It's just such a cool and different way to end off a level, and I love it. Next up is Super Robo Chaos from Skylanders Giants. The entirety of the final level in Giants is just a massive build up to the Chaos fight. And when you finally reach the start of the fight, the tension just keeps on rolling. You start off in a very scary chase sequence where sometimes Chaos even starts running towards you. It's quite easy as long as you just keep on walking down the path, but it's still pretty cool to see. And then just when you think that you've defeated him, it's actually just getting started. Because whilst you're standing there helpless with no escape from Chaos, suddenly Machine Ghost and Hermit come to the rescue and help you out in the fight. I really love this, and I kinda wished that more NPCs helped out in this kind of way. So basically there's two fights going on, because whilst Chaos is summoning some minions to attack you, him and your friends are also fighting each other. Sadly, it doesn't get much more developed from this point forwards, it's mainly just the same thing until you end up defeating him. But honestly, one of the coolest boss fights in the game, hands down. If it was a little bit more complex, then it would definitely be lower down. For my number 8 spot, I have Lord Chaos from Skylanders Spyro's Adventure. Once again, the final level of Spyro's Adventure completely builds up to the Chaos fight. And remember the Hydra, the entire reason that the Core of Light was destroyed in the first place? Well, you finally get to confront it in this final boss. And oh my goodness, it looks so cool. The final fight is pretty much a mix-up of the previous 4 Chaos fights earlier in the game. Except now everything is a lot more intense and definitely a lot tougher. This perfectly acts as a final test of your skills, because whilst it isn't incredibly hard, it will take some concentration. My only gripe with this fight is that it lasts a bit too long, but apart from that, it is really good, and really epic too. Coming in at number 7 is Chompy Mage from Trap Team. The main reason I love this fight so much is because it's really difficult for the level that it's in. You face the Chompy Mage in level 3 of the game, and yet I found myself having quite a struggle with this guy. And really, this fact makes Chompy Mage one of the most unique Skylander bosses of all time. It's weird to think that he's probably one of the hardest Doom Raiders in Trap Team, even though he's the second one you face. And he's just as funny and just as entertaining as Chompy Mage in Giants. Heck, maybe even more so. At number 6 is the final Imaginators boss in this video. This might be surprising for many, but yes, there is an Imaginators boss that's in my top 10 favourites. And that is Fake Crash. I think everybody knows that the best part of Imaginators is the fact that Crash Bandicoot and Neo Cortex are playable characters and have their very own level. And not only does the level look good, have great music, and is really fun, but it's also got quite a good story behind it. Basically, Neo Cortex builds this massive machine, but Fake Crash ends up stealing it. I'm gonna be honest, they did not have to include Fake Crash, but I'm so glad they did. The fan service here is incredible. And I quite like the fight itself too. Just like the rest of the level, the Fake Crash fight mainly revolves around music. You have to avoid attacks by listening to the beat of the tune. It's also quite challenging the first time round. Overall, just a really neat and really cool idea for a boss fight. And at number 5 is none other than Wolfgang. He's a perfectly designed villain with so many unique characteristics. This isn't mentioned too much, but if you look closely at the dialogue, it seems as if Wolfgang was actually going to double cross the Doom Raiders, which is just another thing that's really cool about him. He's a lone wolf. You get it? But when you take him on in the future of Skylands, things really start to kick into gear. This is infamous for one of the hardest Skylander boss fights ever created. And trust me, if you've played it on hard mode or nightmare mode, then you'll definitely understand. You guys know that I love a bit of challenge in my games, and Wolfgang definitely brings it to the table. And speaking of challenge, let's move on to the final Chaos fight on my list, and definitely the hardest one. That being Traptanium Chaos from Skylanders Trap Team. If you are looking for a bunch of very difficult fights, then Trap Team surely is the game for you. Imagine all of the other fights in Trap Team, combine them, and times them by 15. That's how difficult this fight is. Traptanium Chaos uses so many new and really cool looking attacks to throw you off guard. Some of these are pretty much impossible to dodge. There's one last thing I need to tell you about this fight. Make sure you don't have a squad of level 6 Skylanders like I did when I was streaming this game. In third place today is Drill X. Drill X is hands down one of the most memorable parts of the Skylanders series. Not only is he really intimidating, but he's also really unique and charming. I mean, the guy raps for God's sake, it doesn't get more creative than that.
This drill bot is on the scene. I'll let you forward and back with a rubble attack, 'cause you're messing with the wrong machine.
And just to top it off, the boss fight is very intense and very exhilarating. It's really how unique Drill X is that makes me love him so much. You wouldn't see anything like this in any other game than Skylanders. This robot is definitely one of the things that I want Skylanders to be represented by. In second place is the Master of Puppets, Mesmerelda. Talk about creative bosses, because it just gets better and better. You confront this strange spider lady at the end of Frostfest Mountains, and this is one of the best boss fights out of any game I have ever played. If you've played this on Nightmare difficulty, you'll know that this is one of the most action-packed, heart-racing fights of all time. There is so much going on, and there's so much that you have to be careful for. I love how Mesmerelda proves that even kids' games can be difficult at times. I guess that point is kind of ruined by the fact that you can have an easy mode, but whatever. I'm just saying, if you don't like this fight, then we cannot be friends. And my number one favourite boss of all time is one that you guys know I like, but are maybe surprised to see at number 1. And that is the Golden Queen. I've talked quite a lot about how Trap Team is so good when it comes to story and when it comes to villains such as the Doom Raiders. They're just such a massive part of the story, but they also give Chaos some spotlight too. Honestly, a perfect way to make the game feel fresh, and Golden Queen is no exception. During your first playthrough of Trap Team, Golden Queen would feel like the final fight, because at that point you didn't know that Chaos was going to double cross you. And trust me, even if this was the final fight, it would be perfect for it. This is one of the most thrilling and intimidating fights of all time. It's just so fast paced and difficult, you're never given a second to just relax. You're either dodging something, attacking something, running away from something, or jumping over something. It requires your full focus. Golden Queen's attacks are so spontaneous, you never know what's going to happen next. And the very final part, where you have to chase her after she turns gigantic, is a really nice reference to Skylanders Giants. It feels so satisfying to finally trample her with rocks. That sounds a bit sinister, but trust me, she deserves it. Oh my goodness, if you're still watching what's definitely going to be a very long video, then you deserve a good old Crypt Crutcher thank you for watching. I really do hope you enjoyed the video. It's been a lot of fun to make, even if it's going to be my longest one yet. make sure to like and subscribe, and I'm not going to waste any more of your time. Go outside or read a book or go on a walk, something like that. And I'll see you all later.